Science should also form the mental picture of the visible carbon octaves as but a pea-sized volume of solid matter suspended in the center of a great auditorium of rare gaseous matter millions of times greater in volume. Then realize that the very small globular of many solid elements of the carbon octaves are wound up from that vast volume of the hydrogen octaves of space. Matter thus wound up is sequentially unwound into gases of the hydrogen space octaves, and its actions, reactions are recorded in the inert gases which born each octave. Thus, matter gyroscopically emerges from space and is swallowed up by gyroscopic unwindings into the space which borned it, as has been rightly conceived. Space is not empty, nor is it an ether. The space which surrounds every particle of matter in every wave field is the negative half of the wave field. The solid nucleus is the positive half. Both halves are equal in potential but vastly unequal in volume. The next step in habit-forming thinking is to think of matter as being the accumulation of the same thing, wave motion, rolled up in time layers like a snowball, the final layer being called carbon, but all being different conditions and pressures of the same thing. Add to this thought that the universe consists of wave fields within wave fields, stellar, solar, and atomic in measure, but of a like substance and of a like structural formation. Nature has no separate method or process of creating systems. The heavens clearly evidence the unwinding of mass by the way of rings and systems, but the senses do not so clearly record the winding of mass as a basis for systems. During this whole process, each succeeding element becomes another phase of the same thing throughout the whole journey. The change of attribute is due solely to the different relations of pressures, and that is determined by polar relations. Nature does not transmute one element into another. She merely makes her progressive change of elements by a continual readjustment of her gyroscope. Elements are tonal. One wire of a piano can become a whole octave by changing its pressure relations sufficiently to either multiply or divide its vibration frequencies. Everyone is familiar with the fact that placing a book on top of an organ pipe lifts its tone just one octave higher. Such effects are not transmutation. They are merely changed dimensions of states of motion. All of the notes which the organist plays are but one tone multiplied or divided in rhythmic pressure relations. That is why the chemist of tomorrow should think of the elements and not think of them as different chemical substances with different attributes. Chemistry should be based upon the idea of gyroscopically changing the north, south, east, west polarities of one tone to increase or decrease its time frequencies. The piano tuner uses an instrument to wind up his pressures from lower to higher tones. The chemist should use the electric current and solenoids as his tuning instrument. The very thought structure of tomorrow's chemist should very radically change in many other respects too numerous to describe. One of these is to eliminate from his thinking the idea of one thing becoming another. That is not nature's way. In nature, one tone ceases to be and another becomes. In other words, one formula for a patterned wave vibration ceases when another measured vibration begins. We must also carry this thought farther. By not thinking of cessations, beginnings, and endings, we must think of them as awakened continuities which we can put to sleep when we have no further need of them, or awaken when we have need of them. The electric current of the universe is ready to motivate any tone as we desire to awaken it, just as the electric current of the organ is ready to awaken any tone when the organist desires to awaken it. We should not think of sodium and chloride as having become sodium chloride, or that sound has become silence, for each of them is and always will be. We should think of each of them as another note played on the universal organ. We change its tuning pattern if we want new isotopes which nature has not yet given us, or we unite two unbalanced halves to secure stability, or produce explosives by multiplying unbalance. That is nature's way. Carbon unwinds to nitrogen because of the predominant power of east-west negative polarity. Likewise, nitrogen unwinds to oxygen. That does not mean that carbon has ceased to be or that it has become nitrogen and oxygen. It means that carbon still is, but it has changed its pressure dimensions, just as John Jones is the same John Jones that he was 10 years ago. Nature demonstrates this fact by transmuting nitrogen and oxygen back again into carbon. Every root of all vegetable growths rewinds both of them upward again into carbon. Likewise, the bodies of all animals rewind oxygen and nitrogen into the proteins of their flesh, bone, horns, and hair. The roots acquire the complex formula for rewinding into violets, pine, oak, or apple trees, or of man or bird, from the inert gases of their octaves, which have recorded the unfoldings of the many ideas of nature in the seed of those ideas. As nature unfolds from the seed to record its patterns in moving body forms, it simultaneously refolds into its seed in order that the refoldings can be repeated in like patterns. All of nature's many forms are patterned motion picture projections from the still seed patterns stored in the inert gases to make the positives of body forms. The reverse direction of reaction creates the negatives of those body forms. The principle of photography is applied throughout nature. All unfolding and refolding patterns are gyroscopically manipulated, electrically motivated, and magnetically measured and controlled. The above stated facts make it necessary for the chemist of tomorrow to make use of the electric current, the solenoid, and systems of polarity measurements of gyroscopic planes to do in its laboratory what nature does in its laboratory. Nature puts a book upon the top of her organ pipe of the nitrogen tone to produce its octave harmonic, phosphorus, and again to produce the next octave tone above, which is arsenic. Nature does likewise with oxygen to produce sulfur and selenium. Today's chemist makes wasteful and complex use of the electric current, crucibles, and other equipment. The electric power is wasted because it is not directed and controlled by dual polarity. The gyroscope and dual polarity of nature are not a part of the present-day laboratory. A good example of the Haber process of nitrogen fixation, which is purely a present-day expensive and complex laboratory method of separating oxygen and nitrogen, and based upon the belief that each is a different substance. A slight readjustment of nature's gyroscope will produce nitrogen instead of oxygen, or vice versa. Oxygen is nitrogen divided, and the polarity-controlled electric gyroscope is the dividing instrument. Instead of the expensive and time-consuming chemical methods of obtaining free nitrogen in limited quantities, nature's method would produce free nitrogen cheaply, quickly, and in unlimited quantities. It is not necessary to call attention to the value to commerce and to agriculture, not to mention soil regeneration, that this method of obtaining nitrogen would be to the world. In September 1927, I demonstrated this principle of dual polarity control by arranging two pairs of solenoids, one pair with more windings than the other, in such a manner that the dual polarity of nature was simulated. With a steel or glass disc for an equator and a steel rod for amplitude, I adjusted my solenoids approximately to a plane angle where I roughly calculated oxygen belonged in its octave. I improvised an adjustment apparatus which would enable me to fasten any adjustment securely at any angle I chose. I then inserted a few cubic centimeters of water in an evacuated quartz tube, which had electrodes at each end for spectrum analysis readings. Upon heating the tube in an electric furnace and inserting it into the solenoid with the electric current turned on until the tube cooled, the first spectrum analysis showed over 80% to be hydrogen and the rest practically all helium. There was very little oxygen. Each time I reset it, I obtained a new analysis. Whenever I set it to so the north-south polarity was predominant because of using the stronger coils, the result gave more nitrogen. This was because the preponderant north-south polarity prolated the oxygen atom nucleus to its next higher tone. When I reversed the polarity to east-west preponderance, the analysis showed more than its proper amount of oxygen and inert gases and less of hydrogen. This means that preponderant east-west polarity had oblated the hydrogen nucleus. The following analysis is a good example. When I took the tube to the laboratory, there was no water in it. That is why the analyst referred to his report as gas sample number 5, which follows: oxygen 14.9, hydrogen 16.0, nitrogen 69.1. It is needless to say that the above analysis shows east-west preponderance. I am convinced that by proper adjustments mathematically worked out into formulas by experiment, free hydrogen, nitrogen, or oxygen could be obtained without any trace of the others. The only difference between the two methods of working is that electricity is used as power in the laboratory without polarity control or gyroscopic guidance such as I made use of. When the gases have been sufficiently transformed by practice, the transformation of dense matter can then follow. The age of transmutation, new concepts for science, and new values for humanity, and I will begin that in the next video.